Victoria Whitmore threw the front door open and hurled a suitcase down the marble steps into the pouring rain. "Get out of my house, you worthless little nobody!" she screamed, her diamonds flashing under the porch light. Behind her, Daniel Whitmore stood holding divorce papers, and beside him, a stranger wore Emily's own jewelry. 12 years of marriage, and this was the goodbye. Emily said nothing. She picked up the suitcase and walked into the storm. What none of them knew was that she owned the bank holding every loan keeping their empire alive. Before we begin, if you love stories where the quiet ones finally rise, please subscribe to this channel and stay with me all the way to the end, because you will not believe how this ends. And do me one small favor. Comment the name of the city where you're watching from right now so I can see how far this story has traveled tonight. Now let's begin. For 12 long years, the people inside the Whitmore mansion had agreed on one simple thing about Emily Carter. She was nobody. She was the quiet woman Daniel had married for reasons no one in that family ever fully understood. She wore plain clothes when the other wives wore designer gowns. She sat in the corner at dinner parties when the other women worked the room. She spoke softly, laughed rarely, and asked for nothing. And in a family that measured every human being by their bank account, asking for nothing was the same as being worth nothing. Victoria Whitmore had made that judgment on the very first day. She had stood at the top of the grand staircase, looked down at the young woman her son brought home, and decided in less than 10 seconds that Emily did not belong. "She has no name," Victoria had told Daniel that night, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "No family anyone has heard of, no connections, no fortune. What exactly does she bring to this family?" Daniel had shrugged. Even then, even in the beginning, he had shrugged. "She's easy to be around, Mother. She doesn't cause trouble." "A dog doesn't cause trouble either," Victoria had said. "That doesn't make it worthy of the Whitmore name." Emily had heard that conversation. She had been standing just around the corner, still holding the small overnight bag she'd packed, and she had heard every single word. And she had made a decision in that moment that would take 12 years to bear fruit. She decided she would say nothing. She decided she would let them believe exactly what they wanted to believe. Because Emily Carter had learned a long time ago, at her father's knee, that the most dangerous person in any room is the one everyone underestimates. What Victoria did not know, what Daniel never asked, what not a single member of that arrogant family ever bothered to discover, was that Emily was the only daughter and sole heir of Richard Carter. And Richard Carter had built Carter National Bank from a single storefront lending office into one of the largest privately held financial institutions in America. When Richard died, he did not leave his empire to a board of strangers. He left it to Emily, wrapped inside a protected family trust so airtight that no lawyer, no husband, no mother-in-law could ever touch it. And through that trust, Emily quietly held the controlling shares of the very bank that financed every major loan-keeping Whitmore luxury group alive. She never told a soul. Not because she wanted to trick anyone. She kept the secret for one reason, a reason so simple and so human that it broke her heart a little every time she thought about it. She wanted to know if Daniel would love her when he believed she had nothing. She had grown up surrounded by people who smiled at her because of her father's money. She had watched supposed friends calculate her worth before they said hello, and she had promised herself that when she married, she would marry a man who chose her, not her inheritance. So she tested him. Not cruelly, not with games. She simply stayed silent and watched. And for 12 years, Daniel Whitmore failed the test every single day, though he never knew it was happening. Emily saw everything from her quiet corner. She saw Whitmore Luxury Group nearly collapse in the 3rd year of their marriage when a bad expansion into overseas markets left the company bleeding cash. She remembered the night Daniel came home gray-faced and shaking, muttering that they might lose everything. She remembered how she had sat up until 3 a.m. at the kitchen table, reading through his contracts with a trained eye her husband didn't know she had. "This clause here," she had said gently, sliding a page toward him. "If a supplier misses a delivery, you're the one who pays the penalty. You need to reverse that. Make them carry the risk, not you." Daniel had stared at her. "How do you know that?" "I read a lot," she'd said with a small smile. "I get bored." He had used her advice. The company survived. And at the next family dinner, he had stood up and told everyone that his sharp business instincts had saved the day. Victoria had beamed with pride. "That's a Whitmore for you," she'd said. "We're born knowing how to win." Emily had looked down at her plate and said nothing. That was the pattern, year after year after year. When the company faced a lawsuit, Emily quietly reviewed the filing and spotted the weakness in the other side's argument. When a major investor threatened to pull out, Emily was the one who suggested the restructuring that kept him in. When employees came to Daniel in tears because payroll was late during a rough quarter, it was Emily who quietly, anonymously, made sure the money appeared. She never signed her name. She never took a bow. She simply protected the man she loved and the people who depended on him, and she waited for the day he would finally see her. That day never came. Instead, something else came, something that started small and grew like a shadow across the last 2 years of their marriage. A name. Lauren Hayes. Lauren had arrived as a business consultant, hired to modernize the brand, and from the very first meeting, Emily had understood exactly what kind of woman she was dealing with. Lauren was beautiful in the calculated way of someone who treats beauty as a weapon. She laughed at all of Daniel's jokes, even the ones that weren't funny. She touched his arm when she made a point. She called him brilliant so often that Emily began to wonder if the man had ever heard the word before Lauren arrived. And Daniel, who had never once in 12 years told his own wife she was brilliant, drank it in like a man dying of thirst. Emily watched it happen the way you watch a storm roll in from a distance, slowly, then all at once. "You're home late again," she said one night, when Daniel came in past midnight smelling of expensive perfume that was not hers. "Business dinner," he said, not looking at her. "Lauren had ideas about the spring campaign." "I'm sure she did," Emily said. He turned then, and there was something ugly in his face, something she hadn't seen before. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing, Daniel. Good night." She lay awake that night and made herself a promise. If he wanted to walk away from her, she would not chase him. She would not beg. She would not weep and plead for a man to stay who had already decided he was leaving. She had her dignity, and after 12 years of giving everything and receiving nothing, her dignity was the one thing she refused to surrender. But she never imagined how he would do it. She never imagined the cruelty of it. It happened at the Whitmore family's autumn dinner, the biggest gathering of the year. The dining room was full. Daniel's uncles were there, his cousins, the family lawyer, a handful of business partners, and of course Victoria at the head of the table like a queen surveying her kingdom. Emily had spent the morning helping the staff prepare, because even after everything, she still cared about doing things right. She was passing the bread when Daniel stood up and tapped his glass with a fork. The room went quiet. "I have an announcement," he said. Emily looked up, expecting some business news, some deal he wanted to brag about. Instead, Daniel reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick folder of legal papers. He set them down on the table in front of her with a slap. "These are divorce papers, Emily. I've already had them drawn up. All you have to do is sign." The silence in the room was total. Emily felt every eye turn toward her. "Daniel," she said quietly, "you want to do this here, in front of everyone?" "I want it done," he said. "I'm tired of pretending. You've been dead weight in this family for 12 years, and I'm finally cutting it loose." And then it got worse. Victoria rose from her chair, and in her manicured hand, she held a set of keys. Emily's house keys. The keys to the little suite of rooms that had been Emily's only private space in that enormous house. "You'll be leaving tonight," Victoria announced, holding the keys out like a trophy. "The car is already waiting. We've been generous, letting you live here off my son's money all these years. That generosity ends now." Emily stood slowly. Her legs were steady, though her heart was breaking, and that was when she saw her. Lauren Hayes walked into the dining room as if she'd been waiting for her cue. She wore a deep red gown, and around her neck hung a necklace Emily recognized instantly. It was the sapphire necklace Daniel had given Emily on their 5th anniversary. The one piece of jewelry Emily had ever truly loved, because for one brief moment she'd believed it meant he cherished her. Now it hung on the throat of the woman replacing her. Lauren smiled. "Hello, Emily. I hope there are no hard feelings." Victoria let out a soft, satisfied laugh. "Some women," she said to the room, "are only temporary. They keep the seat warm until the right woman arrives." A few of the relatives chuckled. actually chuckled, as if a woman's entire life falling apart was a mildly amusing dinner party moment. Emily looked around that table, at all those faces she had shared holidays with, cooked for, comforted, and helped through hard times. And she understood, finally and completely, that not one of them had ever seen her as a person. To them, she had always been furniture, useful, then unwanted, and now thrown out with the trash. "Is there anything you'd like to say?" Daniel asked, and there was a cruel curiosity in his voice, as if he wanted to watch her cry. Emily thought about a great many things she could say. She thought about the years of advice that had saved his company. She thought about the payroll she'd quietly covered, the contracts she'd rescued, the disasters she'd prevented while he took the credit. She thought about the truth she'd been carrying for 12 years, the truth that would wipe every smug expression off every face in that room. She said none of it. "No," she said simply. "I don't think I have anything to say to any of you." She walked upstairs. She did not rush. She packed a single suitcase, taking only what was truly hers, leaving behind every gift the Whitmores had ever given her. She left the closets full of expensive clothes she'd never wanted. She left the trappings of a life that had never really belonged to her. And when she came back downstairs, the family was still sitting at the table, watching her like spectators at a show. Victoria held out the keys again, wanting the satisfaction of Emily taking them, but Emily walked right past her. "You can keep them," Emily said. "I won't be needing them." She opened the front door herself. Outside, the autumn rain had turned into a downpour, cold and heavy and gray. Behind her, she heard Lauren's voice, light and mocking. "She's actually going to walk out in the rain. How dramatic." And Daniel's voice, cold as the water on the steps. "Let her. It's the last we'll ever have to see of her." Emily stepped out into the storm. The rain soaked through her coat in seconds. She heard the great door of the Whitmore mansion close behind her with a heavy, final thud, and for just one moment, standing there in the freezing rain with a single suitcase in her hand, Emily Carter allowed herself to feel the full weight of what had just happened. 12 years, her whole adult life, given to people who threw her away like garbage the moment they were done with her. But she did not cry. Instead, she began to walk down the long driveway toward the road, and with every step, something inside her changed. The grief was still there, sharp and real. But underneath the grief, something else was rising. Something her father had planted in her long ago and that she had kept buried under 12 years of silence. It was resolve. Because Daniel Whitmore had just made the single greatest mistake of his life, and he did not even know it. He had just thrown out the only person alive who understood how to save his crumbling company. And beyond that, far beyond that, he had insulted, humiliated, and discarded the woman who quietly held the controlling stake in Carter National Bank. The bank that had financed his entire empire. The bank that held every emergency loan, keeping Whitmore Luxury Group from collapsing into dust. He thought he had removed a burden. He had actually removed the hand that had been holding up his entire world. At the end of the driveway, a car was indeed waiting, just as Victoria had promised. But it was not a taxi to some cheap motel, as the family assumed. It was a black sedan, and the driver stepped out the moment he saw her, opening the door and taking her suitcase with the practiced care of a man who had served her family for decades. "Miss Carter," he said, and there was real warmth in his voice and real concern. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Marcus," Emily said, and though her voice trembled just slightly, she meant it. "Take me to the New York office. I want to be there first thing in the morning." Marcus paused, studying her face in the porch light. He had driven for the Carter family for over 20 years. He had driven Richard Carter to 1,000 meetings and driven a young Emily to school. He knew exactly what she was capable of, even if the fools in that mansion did not. "They have no idea, do they?" he said quietly. "Who you are." Emily looked back at the mansion one last time, at the warm golden windows where her husband was probably already toasting his freedom, where his mother was probably already planning Lauren's wedding, where none of them had the slightest idea that the world they had built was about to come apart at the seams. "No, Marcus," she said, "they have no idea at all." She got into the car. As it pulled away from the Whitmore estate and turned onto the dark, rain-slicked road toward New York, Emily leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes. She let herself remember her father's voice, that deep, steady voice that had shaped everything she was. "Emily," Richard Carter had told her, on one of the last good days before the cancer took him, "there will come a time in your life when people will look at you and see nothing. They'll think you're soft. They'll think you're weak. They'll mistake your kindness for foolishness and your silence for stupidity. And when that day comes, you'll have a choice. You can prove them right by falling apart, or you can prove who you really are by keeping your head when everyone else loses theirs. Power isn't proven by revenge, my girl. Power is proven by controlling yourself when the whole world expects you to break." Emily had been 19 when he said that. She hadn't fully understood it then. She understood it now. The car sped through the darkness, and Emily made herself a solemn vow. She would not be cruel. She would not sink to the level of the people who had hurt her. She would not spend her energy on petty revenge, but she would no longer protect them from the consequences of their own choices. For 12 years, she had stood between Daniel Whitmore and disaster, catching every mistake before it could destroy him. She had been his safety net without his knowledge or his thanks. That was over now. She was going to step aside and let the truth do what the truth always does. She was going to open her eyes to the real state of his company, the company she had been quietly propping up for years. And she was going to look at it not as a loving wife, but as the chairwoman of the bank that owned his debt. And she suspected, deep in her gut, that when she finally looked at those books with clear eyes, she was going to find things that would shock even her. She was right. By the time the sedan crossed into New York in the early hours of the morning, the rain had stopped, and the first gray light of dawn was creeping over the city. Emily watched the skyscrapers rise up around her, the same skyline her father had conquered decades before, and she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt like herself again. Not Mrs. Daniel Whitmore, not the quiet housewife in the corner, not the woman they thought was worthless. Emily Carter, Richard Carter's daughter, the heir to Carter National Bank. The car pulled up outside a tall, elegant building in the financial district, a building with her family's name carved in stone above the doors. Emily stepped out, still wearing her rain-dampened coat, still carrying the same single suitcase. She looked up at that name, Carter, gleaming in the morning light, and she straightened her shoulders. Inside, though she did not know it yet, executives were already gathering. Word had traveled through certain private channels overnight. The chairwoman was coming in. The chairwoman, who almost never involved herself in day-to-day affairs, who had kept herself deliberately in the background for 12 years, was walking through the doors first thing in the morning, and something in her had changed. Emily pushed through the glass doors. The lobby was vast and silent at that early hour. A single security guard looked up, and his eyes widened as recognition dawned. "Miss Carter," he said, straightening. "We weren't expecting, that is, good morning, ma'am." "Good morning, Thomas," she said, reading his name badge, giving him the small, genuine smile she gave everyone, from CEOs to security guards, because her father had taught her that a person's worth had nothing to do with their title. "Is the executive floor open?" "Yes, ma'am. They're waiting for you upstairs, actually." Emily nodded and walked to the private elevator. As the doors closed and the car began to rise, she caught her reflection in the polished metal. A tired woman in a damp coat, no makeup, hair still wild from the storm. She looked nothing like the powerful chairwoman the men upstairs were nervously waiting for. And that, she thought, was exactly the point. That had always been the point. The whole world looked at her and saw someone small. They were all about to learn how wrong they were. The elevator doors opened onto the executive floor, and down the long hallway, in the great glass-walled boardroom where her father had once ruled an empire, a row of senior executives rose to their feet the moment they saw her coming. "Good morning, Chairwoman Carter," they said, almost in unison. Emily walked to the head of the table, the same seat her father had occupied for 30 years, and she set down her single-worn suitcase beside the chair. "Good morning, everyone," she said. "I want every file we have on Whitmore Luxury Group, every loan, every account, every transaction going back 5 years, and I want it now." The executives exchanged glances. One of them, a silver-haired man named Gerald, who had served her father faithfully for 2 decades, stepped forward with a folder already in his hands, as if he had anticipated this exact request. "We have most of it ready, Chairwoman," Gerald said carefully. "But before you look, I think you should prepare yourself. What we've found in the last few hours, going back through those accounts, it's worse than anyone realized. Much worse." Emily took the folder from his hands. She sat down in her father's chair, and for the first time in 12 years, she opened her eyes fully to the truth of what her husband's family had really been doing. She began to read. And somewhere across the state, in a warm mansion filled with celebration, Daniel Whitmore was raising a glass to his new future, laughing with Lauren, accepting his mother's congratulations, utterly certain that he had just rid himself of a worthless woman and won everything he ever wanted. He had no idea. He had no idea at all that at that very moment, in a boardroom bearing the Carter name, the woman he had thrown out into the rain was reading, line by line, the complete and detailed record of exactly how his empire was going to fall. The first page told her everything and nothing. Whitmore Luxury Group owed Carter National Bank $47 million. Emily had known the company carried debt. Every company did. But she had assumed it was manageable, structured, the kind of debt a healthy business used to grow. What she was looking at now was not the debt of a healthy business. It was the debt of a drowning man grabbing at anything to keep his head above water. "When did the first emergency loan get approved?" she asked, not looking up. Gerald cleared his throat. 3 years ago, Chairwoman. $12 million. It was supposed to be a bridge loan, 90 days, to cover a seasonal cash flow gap. And it was paid back in 90 days? No, ma'am. It was renewed, and then renewed again, and then a second emergency loan was taken out to help service the first one. Emily turned the page, then another. The pattern was sickening once you saw it. A loan to cover a loan to cover a loan. Money borrowed not to build anything, not to grow anything, but simply to hide the fact that the previous money was already gone. It was a house of cards, and somebody had been very, very careful to make sure the whole thing looked stable from the outside. "Who approved these renewals?" she said. "This is not normal lending. My bank does not renew emergency bridge loans 5 times without escalating them. Who signed off on this?" The room went quiet in a way that made her look up. Gerald's face had gone tight. "That, Chairwoman, is one of the things we think you need to see for yourself." He slid another folder across the table. Emily opened it. Inside were the loan approval documents, and on each one, in the approval field where a senior officer's authorization was required, was a name she did not recognize. A loan officer named Brandon Cole. She had never heard of him. Who is Brandon Cole? A mid-level officer in the commercial lending division. He was hired 4 years ago. He handled the entire Whitmore account personally, and he made sure no one else ever touched it. Every renewal, every extension, every waived requirement went through him, and only him. Emily felt something cold settle in her stomach. Where is he now? He resigned 2 weeks ago, cleaned out his office, gave no notice. 2 weeks, right around the time Daniel had first had those divorce papers drawn up. Emily didn't believe in coincidences. Her father had taught her that when 2 ugly things happened at the same time, you should always assume they were holding hands. "I want everything on Brandon Cole," she said. "His employment file, his compensation, his personal accounts if we can legally access them. And I want to know who recommended him for the Whitmore account in the first place." A younger executive at the end of the table, a sharp woman named Priya, spoke up. "We already pulled the hiring records, Chairwoman. Brandon Cole was recommended for the position by an outside consultant the company brought in around the same time." She paused. The consultant's name was Lauren Hayes. For a moment, the entire boardroom seemed to freeze. Emily heard her own heartbeat in her ears. Lauren Hayes, the woman in her sapphire necklace, the woman who had smiled at her across a dinner table and said she hoped there were no hard feelings. Lauren Hayes had not simply seduced her husband. Lauren Hayes had planted a man inside Emily's own bank, a man whose entire job was to keep the loans flowing while nobody looked too closely. This was not a marriage falling apart. This was a machine. Somebody had built a machine to loot Whitmore Luxury Group and Carter National Bank at the same time, and Emily had been sitting in her quiet corner for years, never suspecting a thing. "How much," Emily said slowly, "has actually left the company? Not the loans on paper, the real money. Where did $47 million go?" Gerald and Priya exchanged a look. Then Priya opened a laptop and turned it toward Emily. "This is where it gets difficult to stomach, Chairwoman." Emily looked at the screen, and she began to understand the full scope of the betrayal. Luxury apartments in 3 different cities, all leased under company names, all occupied by no one connected to any legitimate business function. A private jet lease that had cost the company $4 million over 2 years. Vacations billed as executive retreats to destinations where no business had ever been conducted. Restaurant bills in the tens of thousands. And jewelry. Page after page of jewelry, purchased through company accounts and written off as client gifts. Emily's hand stilled on the mouse. There on the screen was a purchase from 18 months ago, a sapphire necklace, the exact sapphire necklace that Lauren Hayes had worn to that dinner. Except this one had not been bought 18 months ago as a gift to Emily. Daniel had bought Emily's necklace years earlier, on their 5th anniversary. This was a second necklace, an identical one, purchased with company money. Purchased, the record suggested, for Lauren. They hadn't even given Lauren Emily's necklace. That was almost worse. Daniel had looked at his wife's most treasured possession and thought, I'll just buy the mistress her own, charge it to the company. And Lauren had worn it to the dinner where they threw Emily out, close enough to the original that Emily had believed for one gut-wrenching moment that they'd stolen the very thing off her own jewelry box. Emily closed her eyes. She let herself feel it, all of it, the full weight of the humiliation, for exactly 10 seconds. And then she opened her eyes, and when she spoke, her voice was perfectly calm. None of this is client gifts, she said. None of this is business expense. This is personal spending disguised as company operations, and it was funded by loans from my bank that a compromised officer kept renewing, so no one would notice the company had no way to pay any of it back. She looked up at Gerald. Do you understand what this means? It means fraud, Gerald said quietly. It means fraud, Emily agreed. Bank fraud, wire fraud, loan fraud, and it means that my husband, or my soon-to-be ex-husband, has been running his company into the ground while living like a king on money he was never going to repay, and my institution has been the one bleeding for it. She folded her hands. So let me ask the most important question. Right now, today, what is holding this entire structure together? What is the one thing keeping Whitmore Luxury Group from collapsing this afternoon? The answer came from Priya, and it made Emily's blood run cold. You are, Chairwoman. Emily stared at her. There's a loan, Priya continued, pulling up another document. The largest single facility, $20 million. It was approved 8 months ago, and it's the load-bearing wall of the whole structure. Everything else depends on it, and it required a personal guarantee from a controlling shareholder of Carter National Bank. Priya's voice dropped. It was guaranteed by you. The words landed in the room like a stone through glass. That's impossible, Emily said. I never guaranteed anything. I have never signed a single document related to Whitmore Luxury Group. I made a point of it. I kept myself completely separate from Daniel's business precisely so that something like this could never happen. Priya turned the laptop again. Then, Chairwoman, you need to look at this signature and tell me whether it's yours. Emily looked. There, on a personal guarantee dated 8 months earlier, obligating a controlling shareholder of Carter National Bank to personally back a $20 million loan to Whitmore Luxury Group, was her signature, her name, Emily Carter. The loops of the E, the slant of the C, all of it looking almost exactly the way she signed her name. Almost. Emily had spent her whole life around documents. Her father had drilled it into her before she could drive a car. Read every line. Check every signature. Never trust anything you didn't watch someone sign. And now, staring at her own name on a document she had never seen, she felt a strange, icy calm come over her. It's forged, she said. Are you certain? I'm certain, she pointed at the screen. I never cross my T like that. I never have. And the date, 8 months ago. I can tell you exactly where I was that week. I was in Boston. I never came to New York. There is no possible way I signed this document because I have never seen this document until this exact moment. She sat back. Somebody forged my signature to obligate me personally for $20 million. Somebody wanted me on the hook, which means somebody, from the very beginning, was planning for a day when I would be blamed for all of it. The room absorbed that in silence, and Emily, sitting in her father's chair, finally understood the true shape of the thing that had been done to her. This was not a husband who had simply grown tired of his wife. This was a long, patient, calculated plan. Somebody had spent years positioning the pieces. Get Lauren inside the company. Get Brandon Cole inside the bank. Drain the money through fake expenses. Renew the loans so nobody noticed. And then, when the whole rotten structure finally collapsed, as it was always going to collapse, make sure that a forged signature pinned the ultimate responsibility on Emily, on the quiet, worthless wife nobody would think to defend. They were going to throw her out of the family. And then, when the fraud came to light, they were going to point at her forged signature and say, "Look, she guaranteed it. She must have been behind it." The unwanted wife would take the fall, and Daniel and Lauren and Victoria would walk away clean, blaming everything on the woman they'd already discarded. It was, Emily had to admit, almost brilliant. It had only one flaw. They had built their entire plan on the belief that Emily Carter was nobody. They had never imagined that the woman they were framing owned the very bank they were stealing from. They thought they were manipulating a housewife. They had no idea they were stealing from the chairwoman herself. "Gerald," Emily said, "I want you to understand something, and I want everyone in this room to understand it. What was done here was not just a betrayal of me. It was an attack on this institution my father built. They used my bank as a weapon. They corrupted one of our officers. They forged the name of our controlling shareholder. This is not a family matter anymore. This is a criminal matter, and we are going to treat it as one." "Yes, Chairwoman. But," Emily continued, and here her voice slowed, "we are going to do it correctly. We are not going to move on emotion. We are not going to tip anyone off. If Daniel and Lauren find out that I'm here, that I'm looking at these books, they will run, or they'll destroy evidence, or they'll find a way to twist the story. So for now, as far as anyone outside this room is concerned, Emily Carter is a heartbroken housewife who got thrown out in the rain and disappeared. Let them believe that. Let them celebrate. Every day they believe I'm broken is a day they get more careless." Gerald almost smiled. "Your father used to say the same thing. Never interrupt your enemy while he's making a mistake." Emily felt her throat tighten at the mention of her father, but she pushed through it. "Then let's not interrupt them. Let's just watch and document and prepare. When I finally move, I want it to be so complete that there is no argument left to make." She looked around the table. "Now, show me the collateral." Over the next several hours, the executives walked Emily through the rest of the wreckage, and each new discovery was worse than the last. It turned out that the same physical assets had been pledged as collateral on multiple different loans, a practice that was flatly illegal. A warehouse in New Jersey had been used to secure 3 separate loans at 3 separate times, as if it were 3 separate warehouses. Inventory had been valued at retail prices that no one would ever actually pay. The company's flagship brand, the crown jewel that Daniel loved to boast about, had been valued on the books at a number so inflated that Emily actually laughed out loud when she saw it, a short, humorless bark of disbelief. "They valued the brand at $90 million, she said. $90 million. Based on what? "Based on a valuation report commissioned by the company itself," Priya said, "from a firm that, as it happens, did no other business with anyone except Whitmore Luxury Group. It was a firm that existed to produce one number, and that number was whatever Daniel needed it to be." "Another shell," Emily murmured. "Another piece of the machine." She rubbed her temples. "So let me summarize. The company is worth a fraction of what its books claim. It's drowning in loans it can never repay. The money was stolen through fake expenses. The loans were kept alive by a corrupt officer. The collateral is worthless or double-pledged, and the whole thing is being held up by a personal guarantee with my forged signature on it." She looked up. "Have I missed anything?" "Only one thing," Gerald said, and he slid one final document across the table. Emily picked it up. It was the divorce agreement. Her copy. The one Daniel had slapped down in front of her at the dinner. She hadn't read it yet, hadn't been able to bring herself to. But Gerald had clearly gotten a copy through the bank's legal channels and read it carefully. "Page 11, Gerald said. "Clause 14. Emily flipped to it, and there, buried in the dense legal language of the divorce agreement, was a single sentence that made everything suddenly horribly clear. The sentence required Emily, as part of the divorce settlement, to formally attest and confirm that she held no ownership interest, controlling stake, or financial connection of any kind to any banking or lending institution associated with Whitmore Luxury Group or its financing. Emily read it 3 times. They wanted her to sign a legal document swearing that she had no connection to Carter National Bank. "Do you understand what this is?" Gerald asked softly. "Yes," Emily whispered. "I understand exactly what this is." She set the paper down. "If I had signed the divorce agreement without reading it, I would have legally sworn under my own signature that I have no ownership of my father's bank. And then, when the fraud surfaced and they pointed to my forged guarantee, I would have already denied in a legal document the one truth that could have saved me. They didn't just want to divorce me. They wanted me to sign away the ability to ever prove who I really am." The full, breathtaking cruelty of it settled over the room. "They were going to erase you," Priya said quietly. "On paper, legally, forever." Emily sat very still for a long moment, and then slowly, something that was almost a smile touched the corner of her mouth. Not a happy smile, a cold, clear, dangerous smile that none of the executives in that room had ever seen on her face before, but which several of the older ones recognized instantly because they had seen it on her father's face many times. "They made one mistake," Emily said. "They assumed I would sign without reading. They assumed I was too heartbroken, too stupid, too beaten down to check the fine print." She tapped the clause with one finger. "But I read everything. I always have. And this clause, this sentence they buried in here to trick me, is now the single most valuable piece of evidence in my entire case. Because the moment they put it in writing, they proved they knew. They knew there was a connection between me and this bank, and they were desperate to make it disappear. Innocent people don't ask you to legally deny things that aren't true. You only demand someone deny a connection when you're terrified of that connection being real." Gerald let out a slow breath. "They wrote their own confession into the divorce papers." "They wrote their own confession," Emily agreed, "and they handed it to me across a dinner table while their whole family laughed at me. So no, I am not going to sign this. I am going to keep it. And when the time comes, I am going to put it on a table in front of them, right next to my forged signature and their stolen millions, and I'm going to let them explain to a room full of investigators why they were so very anxious for me to deny owning a bank they didn't think I owned." The meeting broke shortly after that, and Emily spent the rest of that first day setting the machinery in motion. She met privately with the bank's chief compliance officer and its head of legal. She authorized a full internal audit of the Whitmore account, conducted with total discretion. She had the bank's security team begin quietly building a file on Brandon Cole, tracking where he'd gone and what accounts had received deposits in the weeks around his resignation. And she gave one instruction that she repeated 3 times to make sure no one misunderstood. "Nothing changes on the Whitmore account. Not yet. Not one loan gets called. Not one credit line gets frozen. Not one flag gets raised that anyone on the outside could notice. Because the moment Whitmore Luxury Group felt the ground shift beneath it, the people who had done this would start covering their tracks." Emily wanted them comfortable. She wanted them arrogant. She wanted them to keep spending, keep lying, keep building the case against themselves with every reckless transaction. "Let them keep digging," she told her team. "The deeper the hole, the harder it is to climb out." That evening, alone in the apartment the bank kept for visiting executives, Emily finally allowed herself a moment of something other than strategy. She sat by the window, looking out at the lights of the city, and she thought about the 12 years she had given to Daniel Whitmore. She thought about the man she had believed him to be. She thought about the version of him she had married, the one who had seemed shy and grateful and kind, and she wondered whether that man had ever existed at all, or whether she had simply seen what she wanted to see. Her phone buzzed. A text message. From Daniel. Emily stared at it for a long moment before she opened it. And when she read it, she almost laughed at the audacity of the man. "Emily," he had written, "I know things got heated tonight. I hope you understand this is just business. There's no reason for us to be enemies. The lawyers will send the final papers next week. Sign them quickly and we can both move on. I'll always be grateful for the years we shared. Take care of yourself." Grateful. He'll always be grateful. For 12 years of a woman saving his company, covering his payroll, catching his mistakes, and he had thrown her out in the rain. And now he texted her the word grateful, as if he were thanking a housekeeper. Emily did not reply. But she saved the message, and she forwarded it to Gerald because it was one more small brick in the wall she was building, one more piece of evidence that Daniel Whitmore believed, right up until the very end, that Emily was a problem to be managed, a signature to be collected, a loose end to be tied. He had no idea that every message he sent, every day he waited, every reckless dollar he and Lauren spent, was making Emily's case stronger and his own position more hopeless. The next morning, Emily received her first real piece of luck, though luck was perhaps the wrong word for it, because it was really the product of her own patience. Brandon Cole, the corrupt loan officer, had made a mistake. In the 2 weeks since his resignation, he had gotten sloppy. The bank's security team had traced a series of deposits into an account he controlled, and the money had come through 2 intermediary shells from an account connected to Lauren Hayes. There it was. The link. In black and white. Lauren had paid Brandon Cole. The consultant had bribed the loan officer. The machine had a paper trail, and the paper trail led straight back to the woman wearing the sapphire necklace. "We have them," Priya said when she brought Emily the news. "This isn't circumstantial anymore. This is a direct financial connection between Lauren Hayes and the officer who kept the fraudulent loans alive." Emily looked at the documents for a long time. "Not yet," she said finally. "We have Lauren and Cole, but I don't just want the consultant and the crooked banker. I want to know how much Daniel knew. I want to know whether Victoria was involved. I want the whole picture before I move, because if I move too soon, the big fish will find a way to blame the little fish and swim away. Daniel will say Lauren did it all without his knowledge. Lauren will say Cole acted alone. They'll turn on each other, and in the chaos, someone will escape." She shook her head. "No, I want them all in the same room, with all the evidence on the table, at the exact moment when there's no story left to tell, when every explanation has already been eliminated." "That's going to take precision," Gerald said. "One meeting, everyone present, all the evidence assembled, and no warning." "Then let's be precise," Emily said. "How do we get all of them in the same room without them suspecting anything?" And it was Priya who came up with the answer, and it was so perfect that Emily actually felt a chill of anticipation. "We invite them," Priya said. "Officially. The bank sends a formal letter to Whitmore Luxury Group requesting an emergency meeting to discuss the restructuring of their outstanding loans. From their perspective, it looks like exactly what they want, the bank coming to the table to give them more time, more money, more room to keep the game going. Daniel will bring everyone. He'll bring his lawyers, he'll bring Lauren, he might even bring Victoria, because he'll want the full team present to negotiate the best possible terms. They'll walk in expecting to be rescued. And instead, Emily said slowly, they'll walk into a room where I'm sitting at the head of the table. And instead, Priya agreed, they'll walk into the truth." Emily was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded, once, decisively. "Send the letter, request the meeting, make it sound routine, make it sound like good news. Give them a date 2 weeks out, so they have time to relax, time to get comfortable, time to spend a little more money they don't have." She stood up and walked to the window. "And make sure the request comes from the bank's restructuring department, not from me. My name goes nowhere near that invitation. As far as Daniel Whitmore knows, right up until the moment those boardroom doors open, his wife is a broken woman who signed his papers and vanished." "Understood, Chairwoman." Emily stood at the window a while longer after they left, looking out at the city her father had conquered, thinking about the man she had married and the family that had thrown her away. She thought about Victoria, holding out those keys like a trophy. She thought about Lauren's mocking little laugh, so dramatic, walking out in the rain. She thought about Daniel, standing in front of his whole family, telling her she had been dead weight for 12 years. And she thought about her father's voice, steady and sure. "Power is proven by controlling yourself when the whole world expects you to break." "I'm not going to break," Emily said quietly to the empty room. "I never was." Somewhere across the state, Daniel Whitmore was living the best 2 weeks of his life. The divorce felt handled. The problem wife was gone. Lauren was radiant and attentive and endlessly complimentary. And then, on a Tuesday afternoon, a formal letter arrived from Carter National Bank requesting an emergency meeting to discuss restructuring the company's outstanding loans on generous new terms. Daniel read it and felt a wave of relief so profound it almost made him dizzy. The bank was coming to the table, just as Lauren had always promised him they would. Everything was falling into place. "See?" Lauren said, reading over his shoulder, the sapphire necklace catching the light. "I told you, everything's going to work out perfectly." Daniel smiled and poured them both a drink. "To the future," he said. "To the future," Lauren echoed. Neither of them noticed the date at the bottom of the letter, 2 weeks out. Neither of them wondered why the bank, which had been so patiently renewing their loans for years, had suddenly requested a formal in-person meeting. Neither of them thought to ask a single question. They were too busy toasting a future that, unknown to either of them, had already been taken out of their hands in a boardroom bearing a name they had never bothered to learn, by a woman they had thrown out into the rain and were certain they would never see again. The meeting was set for 9 o'clock in the morning, exactly 2 weeks away, and Emily Carter intended to be sitting at the head of the table, in her father's chair, with every single document laid out in front of her, waiting for the doors to open. The 2 weeks passed the way a slow-burning fuse passes, quiet on the surface and burning underneath, and on the morning of the meeting, at 8:15, 45 minutes before Daniel Whitmore would walk through the doors of Carter National Bank expecting to be rescued, Emily Carter sat alone in her father's boardroom, arranging documents. She did it herself. She wouldn't let an assistant do it. Each folder went in a precise order, laid out along the great table like cards being dealt for a game whose outcome had already been decided. The loan histories, the fake expense reports, the double-pledged collateral, the inflated valuation from the shell firm, the bank transfers from Lauren Hayes to Brandon Cole, the forged personal guarantee with her own name signed by a hand that was not hers. And at the very end, closest to where she would sit, the divorce agreement, open to page 11, clause 14. The confession they had written themselves. Gerald came in at 8:30. He watched her for a moment. "You didn't sleep, did you?" "I slept fine," Emily said, which was a lie, and they both knew it. She had lain awake most of the night, not from fear, but from a strange, quiet grief. Because whatever else happened today, this was the day her marriage truly ended. Not in the mansion, in the rain, with the whole family laughing. Here, in this room, with the truth on the table. And some part of her, some small and stubborn part, still mourned the man she had believed Daniel to be 12 years ago. "You can still change how this goes," Gerald said gently. "You could hand it to the prosecutors and never be in the room at all. You never have to look at him again." Emily shook her head slowly. "No, Gerald, I have to be here. For 12 years he looked right through me. His mother looked right through me. They decided who I was without ever once asking. Today they're going to see me, really see me, and I need to watch their faces when they do." She squared a folder against the edge of the table. "Not for revenge. My father was right about revenge. This isn't that. This is just the first honest conversation my husband and I have ever had." At 8:50, Priya put her head in the door. "They're here, all of them. Daniel, Victoria, Lauren, and 3 lawyers. They're in the 14th floor waiting room. They're in a very good mood, Chairwoman. Daniel's telling jokes." "Of course he is," Emily said. "He thinks he's about to be saved." She looked at the clock. "Let them wait until 9 exactly, not a minute early. And Priya, when you bring them up, don't say my name. Don't say anything. Just open the doors." Priya nodded and disappeared. Emily sat down in her father's chair. She folded her hands on the table, and she waited. 10 floors below and slightly to the north, in a comfortable waiting room with good coffee, Daniel Whitmore was indeed in an excellent mood. He'd spent the drive rehearsing his negotiation strategy with his lawyers, and the more he talked, the more confident he became. The bank needed Whitmore Luxury Group as much as Whitmore needed the bank, he told them. A collapse would be bad for everyone. They'd restructure the debt, extend the terms, maybe even inject a little fresh capital, and the company would ride out this rough patch and come out stronger. He was almost looking forward to it. "You're going to walk in there and own the room," Lauren told him, adjusting his tie. The sapphire necklace lay against her collarbone. You always do. Victoria sat straight-backed in her chair, radiating the impatient dignity of a woman who felt she was being made to wait beneath her station. I don't understand why we all had to come, she said. This is a business meeting. Why am I here? Because you're a major shareholder, Mother, and the bank wants to see that the whole family is committed to the company's future, Daniel said smoothly. It was what Lauren had told him to say. It reassures them. It shows stability. Victoria sniffed but said nothing further. She had never trusted banks, and she had never enjoyed being summoned anywhere, but she had come because Daniel had asked, and because some instinct she couldn't name had told her she ought to be present. At 9:02, Priya appeared in the doorway. The chairperson will see you now. This way, please. The chairperson. Daniel stood, buttoning his jacket, feeling every inch the confident air. He hadn't asked who the chairperson was. He'd never dealt with the top of Carter National Bank in his life. The account had always been handled by lower-level people, by Brandon Cole most recently, and Daniel had assumed he'd be sitting across from some silver-haired banker he could charm and out-negotiate. He gathered his lawyers, offered Lauren his arm, and followed Priya toward the elevator. The ride up was quiet. Daniel checked his reflection in the elevator's polished doors and liked what he saw. The doors opened onto the executive floor, all glass and light and quiet money. Priya led them down a long hallway toward a set of tall doors at the end. Right through here, she said, and she opened both doors at once. Daniel walked in first, his smile already in place, his hand already extended to greet the chairperson. And then he saw who was sitting at the head of the table. He stopped so suddenly that Lauren, a step behind him, nearly walked into his back. The smile died on his face. His extended hand hung frozen in the air. The color drained out of him so fast that one of the lawyers actually reached out to steady him, thinking he might fall. Emily Carter sat in her father's chair at the head of the great table, hands folded, calm as still water, and she looked at her husband with an expression of complete and unhurried composure. "Good morning, Daniel," she said. "Please, sit down." Behind him, Victoria made a sound, a sharp intake of breath. Lauren had gone very still, her fingers rising unconsciously to the necklace at her throat, and Daniel simply stared, his mouth working, no sound coming out, as his brain tried and failed to make sense of what his eyes were telling him. "Emily," he finally managed. "What? What is this? What are you doing here? This is a private business meeting with the bank." "I know," Emily said. "I called it." You called it. You don't, Emily. You don't have anything to do with this bank. You need to leave. Whatever you're trying to do, this isn't the place. We're here for a serious meeting with the chairperson of Carter National." Around the table, the row of bank executives rose to their feet, and Gerald, standing at Emily's right hand, spoke in a clear, formal voice that cut through the confusion like a blade. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce Emily Carter, sole heir of Richard Carter, controlling shareholder and chairwoman of the board of Carter National Bank." The silence that followed was absolute. Daniel's lawyers looked at each other. One of them very quietly set down his briefcase. Victoria's face went through a sequence of expressions so rapid it was almost comical: confusion, disbelief, dawning horror. And Lauren of the sapphire necklace and the mocking laugh, sat down heavily in the nearest chair as if her legs had simply stopped working. "That's not possible," Victoria said, her voice rising. That's a lie. She has no family. She has no money. She came into our home with nothing. Daniel, tell them. Tell them she's nobody." Emily looked at her mother-in-law with something that was almost, but not quite, pity. 12 years ago, Victoria, you stood at the top of your staircase and decided who I was in 10 seconds. You decided I had no name worth knowing. You never once asked. Not in 12 years. You saw a woman in plain clothes who didn't brag about her family, and you assumed there was nothing to brag about. Emily's voice was quiet and even. But there's a difference between a woman who has nothing and a woman who chooses to say nothing. You never learned to tell them apart. That was your mistake, not mine. Emily. Daniel had found his voice again, and he was trying to reassert control, trying to smile, trying to be charming. Emily, listen to me. If this is true, if you really are, then that's wonderful. That's incredible news. Don't you see? This changes everything. We don't have to be enemies. We're on the same side here. Your bank, my company. We can work together. We can fix all of this together, as partners." "Partners," Emily repeated. "Yes, Emily, I never knew. I swear to you, I never knew. If I had known who you really were, I never would have. The divorce, that was a mistake. That was Lauren's idea. She pushed me into it. I was under so much stress with the company. I wasn't thinking clearly." He was talking faster now, the words tumbling over each other. "We can tear those papers up right now. We can forget all of it. Please, sit down and let's talk about this like the family we are." And there it was. The whole man, laid bare in 30 seconds, 12 years of marriage, and the moment he learned she had money, he loved her again. The moment he learned she had power, the divorce was suddenly a mistake, suddenly Lauren's fault, suddenly something he'd been forced into. Emily had wondered, lying awake the night before, whether some part of her would waver when she saw his face, whether the old love would stir. Now she had her answer. Watching him grovel, watching him reach for her the instant she became useful again, she felt nothing but a clean, cold clarity. "Sit down, Daniel," she said. "You too, Lauren, Victoria, all of you. Sit down. We are going to talk. But not about being partners. We're going to talk about what's actually in these folders." Something in her tone made them obey. Daniel lowered himself into a chair across from her. Lauren was already sitting, frozen. Victoria sat last, stiff with fury and fear. The three lawyers arranged themselves uncertainly, no longer sure whose side of the table they were supposed to be on. Emily placed her hand on the first folder. "Whitmore Luxury Group currently owes this bank $47 million, she began. "I imagine you knew that number, Daniel. What you may not have known is that I now know exactly where every dollar went." She opened the folder and turned it to face him. "Let's start with the loans." Daniel glanced down at the pages, and Emily watched his face carefully as he realized what he was looking at, the full loan history. Every emergency bridge loan, every renewal, every extension, laid out in a single, unforgiving timeline. "These loans," Emily said, "were never used to grow your business. They were used to hide the fact that the previous loans were already gone. A loan to pay, a loan to pay a loan. You've been insolvent for at least 2 years, Daniel, not struggling. Insolvent. The only reason your company hasn't collapsed is that these loans kept getting renewed over and over by a single loan officer who made sure no one else ever looked at your account." That's normal," Daniel said weakly. "Companies restructure debt all the time. That's completely normal. Everybody does it." "They do," Emily agreed. "What isn't normal is this." She slid the second folder across the table. "The expenses." Daniel opened it, and Emily saw the exact moment he understood how much she knew, because he stopped breathing for a second. "Luxury apartments in 3 cities," Emily read from her copy, calmly, evenly. "None occupied by anyone connected to any legitimate business function. A private jet lease, $4 million over 2 years. Vacations billed as executive retreats to places where no business was ever conducted. Restaurant bills in the tens of thousands. And jewelry, Daniel. Page after page of jewelry, all purchased with company money, all written off as client gifts." She paused. "Would you like me to read the itemized list of the jewelry?" "Emily." His voice had dropped to almost nothing. "There's a sapphire necklace on page 4, Emily continued, not stopping. "Purchased 18 months ago, $22,000, charged to a Whitmore Luxury Group operating account and recorded as a client appreciation gift." She lifted her eyes and looked, for the first time, directly at Lauren. "I believe you're wearing it, Lauren." Every head at the table turned toward Lauren Hayes. Lauren's hand flew up to the necklace, and her face went from pale to a blotchy, panicked red. This was a gift," she stammered. "Daniel gave it to me. I didn't know where the money. I never asked." "You never asked," Emily said softly. "How convenient." She turned back to Daniel. "You bought your mistress a $22,000 necklace with money you borrowed from my bank, and you charged it to your company as a business expense. And then you she wore it, to the dinner where you handed me divorce papers and told me I'd been dead weight for 12 years. Emily let that sit for a moment. "I have to tell you, Daniel, of everything in these folders, that's the detail I find hardest to get past, not the fraud, the pettiness of it." Victoria found her voice, and it came out shrill. This is outrageous. You've been spying on us. You've been going through our private business. Daniel, she can't do this. She has no right. I have every right, Emily said, and for the first time, a thin edge of steel came into her voice. This is my bank, Victoria. That's your company's debt, sitting on my institution's books. Every dollar Daniel spent on apartments and jets and necklaces was my depositor's money, lent through my bank, on the assurance that it would be repaid. So do not tell me I have no right to know where it went. She took a breath, and the steel receded, replaced once more by that terrible calm. But we haven't gotten to the worst part yet. Let me show you the worst part. She slid the third folder across, and the fourth, and the fifth. The collateral, she said. A warehouse in New Jersey, pledged as security on 3 separate loans, as if it were 3 separate buildings. Inventory valued at prices no customer would ever pay. And this, she tapped the 5th folder, a valuation report that put your flagship brand at $90 million, commissioned from a firm that did no other business with anyone in the world except your company, a firm that existed to produce one number, and that number was whatever you needed it to be. She looked at him. You didn't just borrow money you couldn't repay, Daniel. You built an entire false structure to make the bank believe you could. That's not a struggling business. That's fraud. Point by point, document by document, that is bank fraud. The 3 lawyers were very still now. One of them was writing something on a legal pad. Another had folded his hands and was staring at the table, clearly calculating how quickly he could excuse himself from all of this. Daniel's confidence had collapsed entirely. He looked like a man watching a wave come toward him that he had no hope of outrunning. Emily, some of this, I didn't know about all of this. The valuations, the collateral, that was handled by other people. I didn't do this. I didn't know. Didn't know, Emily said. You keep saying that. You didn't know about the fraud. You didn't know about the necklace. The divorce was Lauren's idea. The whole thing just happened to you. She leaned forward slightly. Then let me ask you about something you definitely did know about. Let me show you the last folder. She placed her hand on the final document, the one closest to her, and she slid it slowly across the table until it sat directly in front of Daniel. Open it, she said. He opened it. Inside was a single page. The personal guarantee, $20 million, the load-bearing loan, the one holding the entire structure up. And at the bottom, the signature line, filled in with a name. Emily Carter. Daniel stared at it, and Emily watched very carefully and saw the exact thing she'd been waiting 2 weeks to see. She saw that Daniel was not surprised. His eyes didn't widen in confusion. He didn't ask what it was. He looked at that forged signature, and a flicker of recognition crossed his face, and then a flicker of something worse, guilt. He knew this document. He had seen it before. That's my signature on that guarantee, Emily said quietly. $20 million personally guaranteed by me, dated 8 months ago. There's just one problem, Daniel. She let the silence stretch. I never signed it. The room went so quiet that Emily could hear the faint hum of the building's ventilation. I have never seen this document before 2 weeks ago, she said. I was in Boston the week it was supposedly signed. I never came to New York. I have never in my life put my name on anything connected to Whitmore Luxury Group, because I made a deliberate choice from the day we married to keep my father's bank completely separate from your company. So I'll ask you directly, in front of these witnesses, how did my signature end up on a $20 million guarantee I never signed? Daniel opened his mouth, closed it. His eyes darted once toward Lauren, and that single glance told Emily everything. Look at me, Daniel, she said. Not at her, at me. Who forged my signature? I didn't, Emily. I swear I don't know how. You knew this document existed. Emily's voice didn't rise, but it hardened, each word landing like a nail. I watched your face when you opened the folder. You weren't surprised. You've seen this guarantee before. You knew there was a document out there with my forged name on it, obligating me for $20 million, and you said nothing. You let it sit in the bank's files. And then she reached over and pulled the divorce agreement toward her, open to page 11. Then you did this. She turned it to face him. Clause 14 of the divorce agreement you slapped down in front of me at that dinner. Read it out loud, Daniel. Read what you were asking me to sign. Daniel looked down at the page. His hands were shaking now. He didn't read it. You can't, can you? Emily said. Then I will. Clause 14 requires me, as a condition of the divorce, to formally attest and confirm that I hold no ownership interest, no controlling stake, and no financial connection of any kind to any banking or lending institution associated with Whitmore Luxury Group or its financing. She set the paper down. You put a clause in our divorce papers requiring me to legally swear that I don't own this bank. Around the table, the lawyers had stopped pretending to be neutral. One of them had physically shifted his chair away from Daniel. Do you understand what that clause proves? Emily asked. It proves you knew. Innocent people don't ask you to legally deny things that aren't true. You only demand that someone deny a connection when you're terrified of that connection being real. You knew there was a chance I owned this bank, and you knew there was a forged guarantee with my name on it sitting in this bank's files. So you built a trap. You were going to divorce me, get me to swear under my own signature that I had no connection to Carter National, and then, when the fraud finally surfaced and someone found that forged guarantee, you'd point to it and say, look, she guaranteed it. She must have been in on it. And I'd have already denied, in a legal document, the one truth that could have saved me. Her voice dropped. You were going to frame me, Daniel, for your fraud. You were going to make the wife you threw out in the rain take the fall for everything and walk away clean. No, Daniel said. No, Emily, that's not what... Then tell me what it was. She waited. He said nothing. You can't, because that's exactly what it was. And it was almost perfect. It had one flaw. You built the entire plan on the belief that I was nobody. You were so sure I was a worthless housewife that it never once occurred to you that the woman you were framing might be the one person alive who could read that clause, understand it, and turn it into the most valuable piece of evidence against you. She tapped the page. You wrote your own confession, and you handed it to me across a dinner table while your family laughed. Victoria had gone white. Daniel, she whispered. Daniel, what did you do? What did you do? I didn't do this alone, Daniel exploded, and the words burst out of him before he could stop them, the panic finally cracking him open. It wasn't. This was all. Lauren set it up. The loans, Brandon, the guarantee, it was her. She said it would work. She said Emily would never read the papers. She said... He stopped, but it was far too late. Lauren Hayes shot to her feet. Don't you dare put this on me. You spent the money. You signed off on every loan. You wanted the lifestyle. You wanted the jet. You wanted me. Sit down, both of you, Emily said, and something in her voice cut through their panic like cold water. They both fell silent. You'll have plenty of time to blame each other, but before you do, there's one more thing you should know, because you're right, Daniel. You didn't do this alone, and I know exactly who helped you. She nodded to Priya, who opened a laptop and turned it toward the table. Brandon Cole, Emily said, the loan officer who handled your account and made sure no one else ever touched it. The man who renewed your impossible loans over and over and approved a personal guarantee he had to know was forged. He resigned 2 weeks before you handed me divorce papers, and in the weeks around his resignation, a series of payments moved into an account he controls. She let the numbers sit on the screen for everyone to see. The money came through 2 shell companies, but we traced it all the way back. It came from an account belonging to you, Lauren. Lauren made a small, strangled sound. You paid the banker, Emily said. You planted him inside my bank 4 years ago. You recommended him for the very position that would handle the Whitmore account, and then you paid him to keep the fraud alive and forge my signature. It's all documented. Every transfer, every shell, every date. She closed the laptop gently. So no, you didn't do this alone, Daniel, but you didn't do it as a victim either. The two of you built this together, and the only person in this room who had nothing to do with any of it is the woman you threw out in the rain. The silence in the boardroom was the silence of a structure that has finally, completely collapsed. Daniel sat with his head in his hands. Lauren was breathing in short, panicked gasps. Victoria stared at her son as if she had never seen him before in her life, and perhaps in some way she never had. And Emily Carter sat at the head of her father's table, surrounded by the evidence she had spent 2 weeks assembling, and felt none of the triumph she might have expected. She felt only tired, and underneath the tiredness, something quieter, something that felt almost like peace. For 12 years, she said, and now her voice was soft again. almost gentle. The three of you looked at me and saw nothing. You decided my silence was weakness. You decided my kindness was stupidity. You decided that because I never bragged about who I was, I must be no one worth knowing. She looked at each of them in turn, Daniel, then Lauren, then Victoria. But my father taught me a long time ago that the quietest person in the room is not always the weakest. Sometimes she's just the one who's paying attention. Sometimes she's just waiting for the right moment to let the truth speak for itself. She stood. This is that moment. She gathered the divorce agreement, the one document she would keep in her own hands, and she looked down at the three people who had thrown her away. Everything on this table has already been turned over to the bank's legal department and to federal investigators. The audit is complete. The fraud is documented. The forged guarantee is being examined by handwriting experts as we speak. There's nothing left to negotiate, because there was never going to be a negotiation. This meeting was never about restructuring your loans, Daniel. She slid the folders together into a neat stack. It was about you, finally, for the first time in 12 years, seeing exactly who you married. She turned toward the doors. Emily, Daniel's voice was breaking. Emily, please, please, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Don't do this. I'll lose everything. Emily stopped. She didn't turn around fully, but she turned her head, just enough. No, Daniel, she said quietly. You already lost everything. You lost it the moment you decided the person who loved you was worth less than the money you thought she didn't have. I'm not taking anything from you. She paused at the door. I'm just no longer standing between you and the consequences of what you did. And with that, Emily Carter walked out of the boardroom, leaving her husband, his mistress, and his mother sitting in the wreckage of the empire they'd built on the belief that she was nothing. Behind her, she could hear the voices rising, Daniel and Lauren already turning on each other, Victoria demanding to know what would happen to the family. The lawyers quietly gathering their things and heading for the elevator, wanting no part of what came next. Emily did not look back. She walked down the long hallway toward the light, and with every step, the voices behind her grew fainter, until at last she couldn't hear them at all. The collapse came faster than anyone expected, not in months, in days. By the following Monday, 3 days after that meeting, the bank's restructuring department had done exactly what Emily instructed, and not one thing more. They stopped renewing. That was all. They simply declined to extend the next round of loans that had been coming due, the loans Brandon Cole would once have quietly rolled over without anyone noticing. And the moment those renewals stopped, the house of cards that had been standing on borrowed time began to come down floor by floor. Emily got the first call at 7 in the morning. Gerald, his voice careful. It started. Whitmore Luxury Group missed a payment on the $20 million facility at midnight, the one with the forged guarantee. It's officially in default. Emily set down her coffee. And the moment it defaulted, it triggered cross-default clauses on 4 other loans. When one falls, they all fall. By this afternoon, the entire debt structure will be called. 47 million, all due at once. He paused. There's no version of this where the company survives, Chairwoman. It's finished. It was finished the day they stopped being able to hide it. We just stopped hiding it for them. Emily was quiet for a moment. She had known this was coming. She had engineered it in the most technical sense. And still, sitting there in the gray morning light, she felt the weight of it. An entire company, hundreds of people, all of it coming apart because 2 people had decided to loot it from the inside, and one man had been too vain to notice. The employees, she said. Gerald, I want a full list of every employee on Whitmore's payroll. Names, positions, salaries, how long they've been there, all of them. Today. Chairwoman, the bank isn't obligated to... I know what the bank is obligated to do. I'm not asking as the bank. I'm asking as me. Get me the list. By 9 that morning, the news had reached the outside world, and it moved like fire through dry grass. A financial reporter who covered the luxury sector got a tip about the default and started making calls, and by noon, the story was everywhere. Whitmore Luxury Group, the storied family empire, was insolvent, in default on tens of millions in loans, under investigation for fraud. The headlines were merciless. The company that had spent decades selling an image of effortless wealth was suddenly, publicly, revealed to be hollow. And once the first crack appeared, everything came apart at once. Investors who had put money into Whitmore projects started calling their lawyers within the hour. Business partners who had signed deals on the assumption that the company was solid began quietly, and then not so quietly pulling out. Suppliers who were owed money and had been patiently waiting suddenly demanded to be paid immediately, sensing correctly that if they waited any longer, there would be nothing left to pay them with. A commercial real estate developer who'd been about to close a major partnership with Whitmore killed the deal in a single terse phone call. The retail landlords who leased space to Whitmore boutiques began sending default notices of their own. It was a stampede, and at the center of the stampede stood Daniel Whitmore, who 3 days earlier had walked into a bank believing he was about to be rescued, and who now watched everything he had spent his life pretending to build dissolve in front of him. He called Emily 11 times that first day. She didn't answer a single one. On the 12th call, he left a voicemail, and against her better judgment, she listened to it. Emily, please pick up. Please, everything's falling apart. The investors are gone. The partners are pulling out. I've got creditors calling every minute. You have to help me. You have to. You're the only one who can stop this. Call the bank off, please. Just give me some time. Give me a few months. I can fix this. I swear I can fix this if you just give me a chance. His voice cracked. Emily, we were married for 12 years. 12 years has to mean something. Please, I'm begging you, don't let me lose everything. Emily listened to the whole thing. Then she deleted it, and she noticed something about herself as she did it. Her hand didn't shake. Her heart didn't race. The voice of the man who had thrown her out in the rain, begging her now for mercy, stirred nothing in her at all. Not satisfaction, not grief, just a quiet, settled distance, like looking at a photograph of a place you used to live. The one thing his voicemail did do was clarify something for her. 12 years has to mean something. He was right, in a way. It did mean something. It meant she knew exactly who he was now, in a way she never had before. Because a person truly shows you who they are, not when things are going well, but when everything is falling apart. And what Daniel Whitmore had shown her, in the wreckage, was that even now, even at the end, his first and only thought was himself. Not the employees losing their jobs, not the depositors whose money he'd stolen. Himself. Save me, help me. Don't let me lose everything. Let me lose. She thought about the hundreds of people on the payroll list Gerald had brought her that morning, and she made her decision. The next day, while the Whitmore empire continued its public collapse, Emily quietly began doing something that no one expected, least of all the family. She began, through the Carter Foundation, the charitable organization her father had established decades earlier, and that Emily had quietly run for years without anyone in the Whitmore family ever knowing it existed, to help the people the collapse was about to hurt. Not Daniel, not Lauren, not Victoria. The workers. She called an emergency meeting of the foundation's board. There are going to be several hundred people out of work within the month, she told them. Salespeople, warehouse staff, administrative workers, seamstresses in the workshops, people who had nothing to do with any of this, who showed up every day and did their jobs and trusted that their paychecks would keep coming. They're the ones who are going to suffer, and they're the ones nobody's thinking about. She looked around the table. I want to change that. Within a week, the foundation had established an emergency assistance fund. Any Whitmore Luxury Group employee who lost their job in the collapse could apply for immediate financial support to cover rent, groceries, medical needs, whatever they required to stay afloat while they found new work. Emily personally authorized the initial funding and told the board not to worry about the amount. My father built his fortune on the labor of people like these, she said. The least his money can do is catch them when they fall. But she didn't stop at money. She reached out, quietly, to other companies in her network, businesses that owed the Carter family favors or simply valued the relationship with Carter National Bank, and she began finding these displaced workers new jobs. A logistics company hired 40 of the warehouse staff. A rival luxury house, discreetly, took on a dozen of the most skilled craftspeople from the Whitmore workshops. A retail chain absorbed a large portion of the sales team. One by one, the people Daniel's greed had put out on the street found new places to land, and almost none of them ever knew that the woman arranging it all was the same quiet housewife they'd occasionally seen at company functions, the one Daniel Whitmore had introduced. On the rare occasions he introduced her at all, as just my wife. There was a woman named Rosa who had worked in the Whitmore workshops for 19 years, sewing linings into coats, a job she'd taken to support 3 children after her husband died. Rosa was 58 years old, and when the company collapsed, she was terrified, certain that no one would hire a woman her age. She applied to the foundation fund, not really expecting anything. 3 days later, she got a call, not just approving her assistance, but offering her a position at another atelier that valued exactly her kind of experience. Rosa cried on the phone. She asked the foundation representative who she could thank. The representative, following Emily's instructions, simply said, "A friend who believes people like you shouldn't pay for other people's mistakes." Rosa never knew it was Emily. That was how Emily wanted it. Meanwhile, the family was disintegrating. Victoria Whitmore, who had spent decades as the untouchable matriarch, who had held Emily's house keys like a trophy and ordered her out into the rain, now found herself watching strangers walk through the family mansion with clipboards. The estate had been pledged, it turned out, as collateral on one of the loans, one of the many things Daniel had done without telling his mother. When the loans were called, the mansion became an asset to be evaluated and, eventually, seized. Victoria stood in her own grand foyer and watched appraisers photograph her furniture, her paintings, the chandelier she'd imported from Italy, all of it now belonging, in effect, to the creditors. She called Emily, too. Emily almost didn't take it, but something made her answer. "You've destroyed this family," Victoria said, and her voice was not the imperious voice Emily remembered. It was thin and frightened and old. "You've destroyed everything my husband and I built. I hope you're proud of yourself." Emily was quiet for a moment. "Victoria, I want you to hear me clearly, because I'm only going to say this once. I didn't destroy anything. Your son borrowed money he couldn't repay and spent it on apartments and jets and jewelry for another woman. He committed fraud. He forged my name. He tried to frame me for his crimes. I didn't do any of that. I just stopped hiding it." She let that settle. "For 12 years, I helped keep his company alive. I reviewed his contracts. I caught his mistakes. I covered payroll when he couldn't. I did all of it silently, and he took the credit, and you told everyone at every dinner that it was the Whitmore genius that kept the company afloat. It was never the Whitmore genius, Victoria. It was me. And the day he threw me out was the day the company lost the only thing holding it together." There was a long silence on the line. "You could have told us," Victoria said finally, and there was something almost pleading in it. "If you just told us who you were, from the beginning we would have—" "You would have what?" Emily asked gently. "Treated me with respect? That's exactly the point, Victoria. You would have respected my money. You never would have respected me. And I spent 12 years wanting to know if anyone in that family could love the woman without the fortune. Now I have my answer. All of you failed the same test every single day without even knowing you were taking it." She paused. "I'm sorry it ended this way. I truly am. But I didn't do this to you. Your family did this to yourselves. I just stopped protecting you from it." She hung up, and she did not feel triumphant. She felt only a deep, aching sadness for all of it. For the years she'd wasted. For the man she'd thought she married. For the family that could have loved her and chose contempt instead. Lauren Hayes, for her part, tried to run. The moment the fraud investigation became public, Lauren understood that she was in far more danger than Daniel. Daniel could at least claim, however implausibly, that he was a foolish businessman who'd lost control of his own company. Lauren couldn't claim that. The paper trail was too clear. She had planted Brandon Cole. She had paid him. She had orchestrated the forgery. She was, in the cold language of the investigators now examining the case, the architect of the entire scheme. And architects go to prison. So Lauren tried to disappear. She emptied what accounts she could access and booked a flight out of the country. But she had underestimated, as everyone in this story had underestimated, how thoroughly Emily had prepared. The bank's security team had been watching Lauren's financial movements since the day Emily first saw those transfers to Brandon Cole. The moment Lauren started moving money and buying travel, flags went up. The information went to the federal investigators. And Lauren Hayes was stopped at the airport, at the gate, ticket in hand, one step from vanishing. She did not vanish. She was detained and then charged, and the sapphire necklace, the $22,000 necklace she'd worn to the dinner where they threw Emily out, was entered into evidence in a plastic bag with a case number written on the label. When Emily heard that Lauren had been stopped at the airport, she felt something she wasn't proud of, a small flicker of grim satisfaction, and then she let it go. It wasn't the necklace or the arrest that mattered to her. It was that Lauren had genuinely believed, right up until the gate, that she was smarter than everyone around her, that she could destroy a woman's marriage, loot a company, corrupt a bank, forge a signature, and simply walk away clean. She had built her entire life on the assumption that the people around her were fools, and she had been stopped in the end by the one person she'd been most certain was a fool of all, the quiet wife, the nobody. Brandon Cole, the loan officer, folded almost immediately. Facing serious federal charges, he did what men like him always do. He started talking. He told the investigators everything, hoping to save himself. He confirmed that Lauren had recruited him, had paid him, had directed him to renew the fraudulent loans and to process the forged guarantee. He confirmed that he had known the signature was fake and had approved it anyway. Every word he gave the investigators drove another nail into the case, and every word confirmed what Emily had known from the moment she first saw those documents in her father's boardroom. This had never been an accident. It had never been mismanagement. It had been a deliberate, coordinated theft, planned patiently over years and designed from the beginning to end with an innocent woman taking the blame. But the innocent woman had read the fine print. Roughly 2 weeks into the collapse, on a gray afternoon, Daniel came to see Emily in person. He hadn't been able to reach her by phone, and desperation had made him bold, or perhaps just made him foolish in a new way. He showed up at the Carter National Building and asked, at the front desk, to see the chairwoman. The old Daniel would never have humbled himself at a front desk. This Daniel had nothing left to protect. Emily could have refused. Her assistant offered to send him away, but something in her, some last thread of the 12 years, made her say, "No, let him come up. 10 minutes." He looked terrible when he walked into her office. Not the confident heir who'd stood in front of his family and slapped divorce papers on the table. Not the smooth negotiator who'd walked into the bank certain of rescue. This was a hollowed-out man, thinner, gray-faced, his expensive suit hanging on him like it belonged to someone else. "You look well," he said, and even tried, weakly, to smile. "You don't," Emily said, not unkindly. "Sit down, Daniel. You have 10 minutes. Say what you came to say." He sat. He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands, and when he finally spoke, the arrogance was gone entirely, and what was left was almost a child. "You destroyed everything," he said. "The company, the house, my name, everything my family built. It's all gone. Do you understand that? It's all gone. And it's because of you." Emily looked at him steadily, and when she answered, her voice was calm and clear and carried no anger at all, which somehow made it land harder than anger ever could have. "No, Daniel, that's the last lie you're telling yourself, and I'm going to take it away from you too, because you'll never heal until someone does." She leaned forward slightly. "I didn't destroy anything. For 12 years, I was the thing standing between you and this exact moment. Every mistake you made, I caught it. Every disaster that was coming, I stopped it. Every time you were about to fall, I put myself underneath you without you ever knowing. I was the floor you walked on. You just never looked down." She held his gaze. "The day you threw me out, you didn't get rid of a burden. You got rid of the only thing holding you up. And then you fell. Not because I pushed you, because there was nothing left to catch you." She sat back. "I didn't destroy you, Daniel. I just stopped protecting you from yourself." Daniel stared at her, and slowly, terribly, she watched the truth of it reach him. It was the first honest moment she'd ever seen on his face in 12 years of marriage. The realization that his ruin had not been done to him, that it had been done by him, and that the only reason it had taken so long to arrive was that a woman he'd treated as furniture had been quietly holding back the flood. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I didn't know it was you. All those years, the contracts, the payroll, I thought I was just lucky." "You weren't lucky," Emily said quietly. "You were loved. There's a difference. And you never learned to tell them apart either, just like your mother. He put his face in his hands, and for a moment his shoulders shook. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. Is there anything I can do? Anything at all? To fix this, to make it right? And Emily, who had every reason in the world to say no, who had been humiliated and discarded and nearly framed for crimes she didn't commit, surprised even herself with her answer. Yes, she said. There is one thing. When the investigators come to you, and they will, tell them the truth, all of it. Don't lie to protect yourself. Don't blame Lauren for the parts that were yours. Don't play the victim. Just tell the truth, completely, for once in your life. She stood, signaling that the 10 minutes were over. It won't save your company. It won't save your name. But it might be the first thing you've ever done that's actually worth something. And it might someday be the beginning of you becoming a person you don't have to lie about. Daniel stood too. He looked at her for a long moment, and there were 100 things in his face, regret and shame and something that might have been far too late, a kind of respect. I'm sorry, Emily, he said, for all of it. I know it doesn't matter now, but I'm sorry. I know you are, Emily said, and she meant it. Goodbye, Daniel. He walked to the door. He paused there, his hand on the frame, and without turning around, he said, very quietly, You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I threw you out in the rain. Yes, Emily said softly, you did. And then he was gone. Emily stood alone in her office for a long time after the door closed. She walked to the window and looked out at the city, at the skyline her father had conquered, and she let herself feel the full strange weight of everything that had happened. She had won. By any measure, she had won completely. The people who had wronged her had lost everything. The truth had come out. Her name was cleared, her ownership protected, the fraud exposed, the guilty facing justice. And the people who deserved help, the workers, the innocent ones, were being caught and cared for. And yet she did not feel like a woman who had won a war. She felt like a woman who had survived one. There is a difference between those two things, and only people who have actually been through it understand it. Victory is loud. Survival is quiet. Victory celebrates. Survival just breathes and is grateful to still be standing. She thought about her father and what he would have said if he could see her now. She could almost hear his voice. Power isn't proven by revenge, my girl. Power is proven by controlling yourself when the whole world expects you to break. She hadn't broken. Through all of it, the humiliation and the betrayal and the loneliness, she hadn't broken. And she hadn't become cruel either, which her father would have counted as the greater victory. She had been handed every reason to become as cold and vengeful as the people who'd hurt her, and she had chosen again and again to be something better instead, to protect the innocent, to tell the truth, to let justice do its work without lowering herself into the mud alongside the people who belonged there. Her assistant knocked softly and came in. Chairwoman, the foundation sent over the latest numbers. As of this morning, every single employee from the Whitmore collapse who applied for assistance has been either placed in a new position or is receiving support while they look. Every one of them. Rosa Delgado, the woman from the workshops, wanted me to pass along a message. She said to tell you, whoever you are, that you gave her back her life. Emily was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled, a real smile, the first one in a long time. Tell her, she said, that she gave it back to herself. I just opened the door. Her assistant nodded and left, and Emily turned back to the window and stood there as the afternoon light shifted across the city, thinking about doors and about all the years she'd spent standing quietly in the background of a life that never appreciated her, waiting, without even fully knowing she was waiting, for the moment when she would finally step forward and let the world see who she'd been all along. That moment had come, and she had not wasted it. The morning after Daniel left her office, Emily received a phone call she did not expect. It was from a name she hadn't heard in years, a man named Arthur Penn, who had been her father's closest friend and business partner before Richard Carter died. Arthur was in his 70s now, long retired, and he'd been watching the Whitmore collapse in the news with the sharp attention of a man who had spent his whole life reading between the lines of financial stories. Emily, he said when she picked up, I've been reading about your husband's company. Ex-husband nearly, Emily said. The divorce is being finalized." "So I gathered." There was a pause, and then Arthur said something that caught her off guard. "Your father would have been proud of how you handled it, but he'd also be worried about you. So I'm calling to do the worrying for him. Are you all right, Emily? Really?" The question landed in a place she hadn't let anyone touch in a long time. For weeks she had been strategy and calm and control. The chairwoman, the woman with the folders, the one who never broke. No one had asked her, in the middle of all of it, whether she was actually all right. And the truth was that she didn't entirely know. "I don't know, Arthur," she admitted, and the honesty of it surprised her. "I keep waiting to feel something. Relief, maybe, or anger, or joy that they got what they deserved. But mostly, I just feel tired, and a little bit lost, if I'm honest. For 12 years, my whole life was organized around a man and a family. Now that's gone, and I'm not sure who I am without it." "You're Richard Carter's daughter," Arthur said simply. "You always were. You just spent 12 years pretending to be someone smaller because you wanted to see if love was real." He was quiet for a moment. "Was it? Real, I mean. For you, at least?" "Yes," Emily said softly. "For me, it was real. That's the part that hurts. I did love him, the man I thought he was. I gave that man everything I had. It just turned out he was never really there." "Then you didn't lose him in that boardroom," Arthur said. "You lost him a long time ago. You've just been the last one to find out." He let that sit, and then his voice warmed. "Come see me, Emily. An old man would like to look at his best friend's daughter and see that she's still standing. And I have some things of your father's I've been keeping, things I think he'd want you to have now, at this particular moment in your life." Emily agreed, and 2 days later, she drove out to Arthur's house on the coast, a modest place, nothing like the Whitmore mansion, full of books and old photographs and the smell of the sea. Arthur was smaller than she remembered, his hands unsteady, but his eyes were exactly as sharp as they'd always been. He made her tea, and they sat and talked, and for the first time in weeks, Emily felt something in her chest loosen, the tight knot of vigilance she'd been carrying since the night she walked out into the rain. "Your father made a mistake with you," Arthur said after a while. "I loved him, but I'll say it. He made a mistake." Emily looked up, startled. "What do you mean?" "He raised you to be strong, to read every contract, to trust no signature you didn't watch get signed, to keep your head when everyone else lost theirs. All good things. But he also raised you to hide, to keep your power secret, to test people by pretending to be less than you were." Arthur shook his head slowly. He did it because he'd been burned so many times by people who only wanted his money. He wanted to protect you from that. But protection can become a prison, Emily. You spent 12 years hiding who you were, and you let a family treat you like nothing, because some part of you believed that the only way to know if love was real was to pretend you had nothing to offer. He reached over and put his weathered hand on hers. "You don't have to hide anymore. That test is over. You passed it, even if they failed it. You never have to shrink yourself again to find out if someone loves you. Anyone worth loving will see who you are and love you for it, not in spite of it." Emily felt tears come to her eyes, unexpected and hot. She hadn't cried through any of it. Not when Daniel handed her the papers, not when Victoria held out the keys, not walking out into the rain, not in the boardroom, not on any of the long nights building her case. But now, sitting in this small, warm house with her father's oldest friend, hearing the thing she had most needed to hear from someone who had earned the right to say it, the tears finally came, and she let them. For the first time in 12 years, she let herself simply be a woman who had been hurt instead of a chairwoman who had won. "I don't know how to stop hiding," she said, wiping her face. "I've done it for so long, I don't know who I am when I'm not." "You'll learn," Arthur said gently. "You've got the rest of your life to learn, and you won't be alone in it. There are people who remember who you really are. There are people who loved your father and who are going to love you, not for the bank, not for the trust, but because you're the kind of person who, in the middle of losing everything, thought first about the seamstresses and the warehouse workers." He smiled. "You think I didn't hear about that? Everyone in our world heard about that. A woman gets betrayed, framed, thrown out in the rain, and when the empire that wronged her collapses, her first move is to find new jobs for the people who cleaned its floors. That's who you are, Emily. Not the woman who brought down the Whitmores, the woman who caught the people the Whitmores would have let fall. Emily stayed with Arthur until evening. Before she left, he gave her the things he'd been keeping: a box of her father's personal papers, a few photographs of Richard as a young man she'd never seen, and one letter, sealed, with her name written on the front in her father's handwriting. "He gave me that years ago," Arthur said. "He said to keep it until you needed it. He didn't say when that would be, but I think it's now, Emily. I think this is the moment he was thinking of when he wrote it." Emily didn't open the letter in front of Arthur. She waited until she was home, alone, in the quiet of the apartment, and then she sat by the window with a glass of wine and broke the seal with trembling hands. The letter was short. Her father had never been a man of many words. "My Emily," it began, "if Arthur has given you this, then something has happened that has tested you the way life eventually tests everyone worth testing. I don't know what it was. A betrayal, most likely. The people we love have the most power to hurt us, and someday someone you loved will use that power against you. When they do, I want you to remember 3 things. First, that being underestimated is not an insult. It is an advantage. Let them think you are small. It costs you nothing, and it costs them everything. Second, that your power was never the bank. The bank is just money, and money is just a tool. Your power is your character, the thing inside you that stays steady when the world tries to break it. No one can take that from you unless you hand it to them. And third, my girl, the most important thing of all, do not let what they do to you turn you into them. It is easy to be kind when you are winning. The test of a person is whether they can be kind when they have every reason to be cruel. If you can hold on to your kindness through the worst thing anyone ever does to you, then you will have won something far greater than any fortune. You will have kept your soul. I love you more than the whole empire I built. The empire was never the point. You were always the point. Your father, Richard." Emily read it 3 times, and then she set it down and cried again, harder this time, the kind of crying that isn't sadness exactly, but something more like release, the sound a person makes when they finally set down a weight they've carried so long they forgot it was heavy, because her father had known. Somehow, years before it happened, he had known that this day would come, and he had reached across death to tell her the one thing she most needed to hear: that she had done it right, that being underestimated had been her strength, that her power had never been the money, and that the fact that she had refused to become cruel, even when cruelty would have been so easy and so justified, was the real victory, the only one that mattered. She thought about Lauren, stopped at the airport, and Brandon Cole, confessing to save himself, and Victoria, watching strangers photograph her chandelier, and Daniel, hollow and broken in her office, saying he was sorry. She could have made all of it worse. She'd had the power to. She could have gone to the press herself, could have made a spectacle of their ruin, could have crushed them in 100 small, cruel ways, and no one would have blamed her. And she had chosen not to. She had let justice do its work, and she had spent her energy not on their destruction, but on the salvation of the innocent people caught in the wreckage. Her father was right. That was the win, not the collapse of the Whitmore empire. The fact that she had walked through the fire of the worst betrayal of her life and come out the other side, still herself, still kind, still whole. In the days that followed, Emily made a decision that surprised the Foundation's board and would have astonished the Whitmores if they'd known. She decided to make the Emergency Assistance Program permanent and to expand it. It wouldn't just help the Whitmore employees. It would become a standing fund, part of the Carter Foundation's permanent work, dedicated to catching working people when the companies they trusted collapsed underneath them. Because Emily had learned something in all of this that she couldn't stop thinking about. When empires fall, the people who built them at the top always have somewhere to land. Daniel would survive, poorer and disgraced, but he would survive. Victoria would survive. Even Lauren, whatever happened to her, had chosen her fate. It was the people at the bottom, the Roses of the world, the ones who'd done nothing but show up and do honest work, who fell the furthest and had the least to catch them. Emily decided she would spend a good portion of the rest of her life making sure someone caught them. "Your father built a bank," Arthur told her when she called to tell him. "Maybe you're meant to build something else, something he didn't quite know how to build because his generation was too busy surviving to think about it. A safety net for the people nobody else thinks about." "Maybe," Emily said. And for the first time since she'd walked out into the rain, she felt something that wasn't tiredness or grief or grim resolve. She felt purpose, a reason to have survived, a shape for the life that came next. She was no longer just the woman they'd thrown away. She was no longer even just the woman who'd survived them. She was becoming something new, something her father had glimpsed but never lived to see. And she was building it with her own hands, out of the wreckage of everything they'd tried to take from her. The divorce was finalized on a Thursday in early spring, 6 months after the night Emily walked out into the rain. She almost didn't go to the final hearing. Her lawyers told her she didn't need to be there. Everything had already been settled in her favor, so overwhelmingly that there was nothing left to argue. But Emily decided to attend anyway, for the same reason she'd sat at the head of that boardroom table instead of handing the folders to prosecutors. She needed to be present for the ending. She needed to see it through with her own eyes. The courtroom was quiet. Daniel was there, thinner than ever, wearing a suit that no longer fit a man who no longer had anywhere important to wear it. He didn't try to charm anyone this time. He didn't argue. When the judge reviewed the findings, Daniel simply sat with his hands folded and his head slightly bowed, a man who had finally stopped pretending. The court's ruling was thorough. It recognized Emily's contributions to the marriage and to Whitmore Luxury Group over 12 years, contributions that the evidence now made undeniable. It documented Daniel's financial misconduct in full. It confirmed, based on the handwriting analysis, that Emily's signature on the $20 million guarantee had been forged, clearing her completely of any liability. And it protected, absolutely and permanently, her ownership of Carter National Bank through her father's trust. The clause Daniel had buried in the original divorce papers, the one demanding Emily deny any connection to the bank, was struck down and entered into the record as evidence of intent to defraud. When it was over, the judge looked at Emily over her glasses and said something that wasn't strictly part of the ruling. "Miss Carter, in 30 years on this bench, I've seen a great many people wronged. Very few of them handled it the way you did." The court notes for the record that despite having every legal right to pursue maximum damages against Mr. Whitmore personally, you declined to do so, and instead directed your resources toward the employees affected by the company's collapse. That's not a legal finding. That's just an observation from someone who's watched a lot of people at their worst. It was good to see someone at their best. She set down her pen. "This court is adjourned." Emily and Daniel left the courtroom at the same time, walking down the same corridor, and for a moment they ended up side by side near the doors. Neither had planned it. They simply found themselves there together, one last time, at the end of everything. "Well," Daniel said quietly, "that's it then. 12 years. 12 years, Emily agreed. He stopped and turned to her. He looked at her for a long moment, and there was no anger in his face anymore, no desperation, none of the charm he'd once worn like armor, just a tired, sad honesty. "Can I ask you something? And I want you to tell me the truth, even if it's hard to hear." "All right. That first year," Daniel said, "before any of the rest of it. Were you happy, even a little? Was any of it real for you?" Emily considered the question carefully because he deserved a careful answer and because she owed the truth as much to herself as to him. "Yes," she said. "The first year I was happy. I thought I'd found a man who loved me for who I was, because he didn't know there was anything else to love me for. That was the whole point, Daniel. I never told you about the bank because I wanted to be sure. I wanted one thing in my life that was real, that wasn't about my father's money." Her voice was steady, but it carried the weight of every year behind it. "For a while, I believed I'd found it. That's what makes all the rest of it so sad. It's not that you never loved me. It's that somewhere along the way, you decided that loving me wasn't as valuable as the things you thought you could get without me. And you were wrong. But by the time you understood that, it was already too late." Daniel absorbed that. His eyes were wet. "I would give anything to go back to that first year," he said, "and do all of it differently." "I know," Emily said. and gently, without cruelty, she added the thing he needed to hear. "But that's not how it works, Daniel. We don't get to go back. We only get to go forward and be better and try to become people who wouldn't make the same mistake twice. That's all any of us get. I hope you use it. I really do." She held out her hand. After a moment, he took it. It was the last time they would ever touch, a simple handshake between two people who had once promised each other forever, and it carried more honesty than anything in their 12 years of marriage. "Goodbye, Daniel," Emily said. "Goodbye, Emily," he paused. "And thank you, for the employees, for not destroying me when you could have, for being all this time a better person than I ever gave you credit for." He managed a small, broken smile. "You really were the best thing that ever happened to me." "Go build a life you don't have to lie about," Emily said. "That's the only revenge I ever wanted. Not your ruin, your honesty." And then she walked out of the courthouse and into the spring sunlight, and she did not look back, and this time there was no rain. In the months that followed, the Whitmore name faded from the world it had once dominated. The company was dissolved, its assets sold to pay its creditors. The mansion outside Boston, the great house where Victoria had once reigned and where Emily had once been humiliated on the staircase, was sold to a developer who eventually turned it into something else entirely. Victoria moved into a modest apartment, her fortune gone, her name now associated in every social circle with failure and disgrace. She never fully understood, even at the end, how completely she had misjudged the woman she'd ordered out into the rain. Some people never do. Their pride is the last thing to die, and sometimes it outlives everything else they have. Lauren Hayes was convicted. The evidence was overwhelming, and Brandon Cole's testimony sealed it. She had orchestrated the entire scheme, and she paid for it accordingly. The sapphire necklace, the one she'd worn so triumphantly to the dinner where they cast Emily out, remained in an evidence locker with a case number on the label, a small, perfect symbol of a woman who had reached for everything and grasped nothing. Daniel, to his credit, did the one thing Emily had asked of him. When the investigators came, he told them the truth. All of it. He didn't hide behind Lauren, didn't play the victim, didn't lie to save himself. His honesty didn't save his company or his name, but it did earn him a lighter path through the legal process than he might otherwise have had. More than that, it seemed to change something in him. The last Emily heard, through Arthur, Daniel had taken a modest job at a small firm, using the one genuine skill he actually had, and was living quietly, and had, apparently, stopped pretending to be someone he wasn't. Whether that would last, Emily didn't know, but she hoped it would. She had loved him once, the man she'd thought he was, and some small part of her would always want that man to finally actually exist. As for Emily, her life became something she never could have imagined during those 12 silent years in the background of the Whitmore mansion. She stepped fully into her role as chairwoman of Carter National Bank, and to the surprise of the old guard who'd expected a figurehead, she turned out to be extraordinarily good at it. All those years of quietly reading contracts, catching mistakes, and understanding the machinery of business from the shadows had made her sharper than almost anyone in the building. She was patient where others were rash, careful where others were greedy, and she had an instinct, honed by hard experience, for spotting the kind of quiet rot that had nearly destroyed the Whitmores. Under her leadership, the bank her father built didn't just survive, it thrived, and it did so with an integrity that became its reputation. But the thing that gave Emily the most joy wasn't the bank, it was the foundation. The emergency assistance fund she'd created for the Whitmore employees became the centerpiece of the Carter Foundation's work, expanded exactly as she'd envisioned, into a permanent safety net for working people whose companies collapsed beneath them. Over the following years, it caught thousands of people, warehouse workers and sales clerks and administrative staff and craftspeople, ordinary people who'd done nothing wrong except trust the wrong employer, all of them given a hand up in the worst moment of their working lives. Emily ran it personally. She read the applications herself when she could. She remembered the names. Rosa Delgado, the seamstress who'd sewn linings into coats for 19 years, became something of a symbol of it all, though she never sought to be. She flourished at the new atelier where the foundation had placed her, and eventually she rose to lead the workshop there. Years later, at a small event the foundation held, Rosa finally met the woman who'd quietly saved her, and when she realized that the elegant chairwoman shaking her hand was the same quiet wife she'd occasionally glimpsed at Whitmore functions long ago, the woman Daniel had always introduced, if he introduced her at all, as just my wife, Rosa began to cry. "It was you," Rosa said. "All this time it was you. Why? Why would you do all this for people you didn't even know?" Emily took Rosa's hands, the hands of a woman who'd worked hard her whole life and asked the world for nothing. "Because I know what it feels like," Emily said, "to have everyone decide you're worth nothing, to be looked right through day after day by people who never bothered to ask who you really were. And I know what it feels like to fall and to wonder if anyone will catch you." She smiled. "You were worth catching, Rosa. So were all the others. Every single one of you was worth catching. Somebody just had to be willing to do it." One evening, about a year after the divorce was finalized, Emily did something she'd been putting off for a long time. She drove out to see the old Whitmore mansion before the developer's renovation was complete, while it still stood mostly as it had been. She wasn't entirely sure why she needed to go. Maybe to prove to herself that the place no longer had any power over her. Maybe just to close a door that had never quite finished closing. She walked up to the house where she'd spent 12 years being told she didn't belong. The great front steps where Victoria had once stood screaming and throwing a suitcase down into the rain. The foyer where the family had once photographed their possessions like people at a funeral. The staircase where a young Emily had overheard herself dismissed as a woman with no name worth knowing. She stood in the empty foyer for a long time, and she waited to feel something. Anger, maybe, or grief, or the old ache of humiliation. But it didn't come. And in its absence, Emily finally understood something that all the victory in the world hadn't been able to teach her. The mansion had never been her power. Standing in it now, seeing it emptied of the family that had wielded it against her, she understood that the house had just been walls and marble and imported chandeliers. It had never contained anything that mattered. The bank had never been her power either. She understood that too, standing there. The bank was money, and money was a tool, exactly as her father had written. It had given her the leverage to expose the truth and protect herself and help the innocent, and those were good things, important things. But the money hadn't saved her. The money had only ever been a lever. The hand that pulled it was something else. Her true power, she finally understood, standing in the ruins of the place that had tried so hard to convince her she was nothing, had been the one thing they could never touch. It had been her knowledge of who she was, held steady and unbroken, through 12 years of being told she was worthless, through the night and the rain, through the betrayal and the framing and the loneliness. They had taken her marriage, her home, and very nearly her name, but they had never been able to take the one thing that actually mattered, because it had never been theirs to take. It had lived inside her the whole time, quiet and patient, waiting. Her father had known. It was in the letter. Your power was never the bank. Your power is your character, the thing inside you that stays steady when the world tries to break it. No one can take that from you unless you hand it to them. She had never handed it to them, not once, not on the worst night of her life. And that, in the end, was why she was standing here whole, and they were scattered to the wind. Emily walked out of the mansion for the last time and closed the door gently behind her. She didn't slam it. She didn't need to. She simply let it click shut, the way you close a book you've finished reading, and she walked back to her car in the fading light, and she drove away, and she never returned. There is a lesson in Emily Carter's story, and it's one worth carrying long after the last word. For 12 years, everyone who looked at her saw a quiet woman in the background and decided she was weak. They mistook her silence for emptiness. They mistook her kindness for foolishness. They mistook her patience for the absence of power. And they were wrong about every single one of those things, catastrophically, ruinously wrong, because they never once understood the most important truth there is about human beings. The quietest person in the room is not always the weakest. Very often, she is simply the one who is paying attention. She is the one who sees everything, remembers everything, understands everything, and says nothing, not because she has nothing to say, but because she is waiting, waiting for the world to show her who it really is, waiting for the right moment, waiting for the day when the truth, held back so long, finally has to be spoken. Emily Carter waited 12 years, and when her moment came, she did not waste it on revenge, and she did not waste it on cruelty. She used it to tell the truth, to protect the innocent, and to prove to everyone who had ever underestimated her exactly who she had been all along. She was never the woman they thought was worthless. She was the strongest person any of them had ever known, and it took losing everything for the world to finally see it. And in the end, standing on her own, needing no one's permission and no one's approval, Emily Carter knew with total certainty the one thing they'd spent 12 years trying to make her forget. She had always been enough. She always would be, and no one would ever convince her otherwise again. 3 years after this day she closed the door of the Whitmore mansion for the last time, Emily Carter received a letter she never expected, and it arrived on an ordinary Tuesday, tucked between bank statements and foundation reports, in handwriting she didn't recognize. It was from a young woman named Claire Whitmore, Daniel's niece, the daughter of Daniel's younger brother, a quiet man named Thomas who had stayed far away from the family business and, as it turned out, far away from the family's cruelty. Emily had met Claire only a handful of times over the years, always briefly, at holidays, when Claire was a shy teenager who hung at the edges of family gatherings the same way Emily herself always had. They had exchanged perhaps a dozen sentences in 12 years. And now here was a letter, 3 pages long, in careful handwriting. "Dear Emily," it began. "You probably don't remember me very well. I was the quiet one at the Christmas dinners, the one nobody talked to, sitting near you at the far end of the table. I think that's actually why I'm writing to you, because I remember watching how they treated you, and I remember being a child and not understanding why everyone was so cruel to the kindest person in the room. I remember once, when I was 14, you noticed I was crying in the hallway because the other cousins had made fun of my dress, and you came and sat with me, and you didn't say anything grand, you just sat with me until I felt better, and then you told me something I've never forgotten. You said the people who make you feel small are telling you about themselves, not about you. I was 14. I didn't fully understand it then. I understand it now." Emily set the letter down for a moment. She did remember that. A slight, tearful girl in a green dress, hiding in a hallway. She hadn't thought about it in years. The letter went on. Claire was 24 now. She'd just graduated with a degree in finance, and she'd been trying to find her way in a world that, since the collapse, treated the Whitmore name like a disease. Doors closed the moment people heard her surname. Interviews ended early. She'd changed to her mother's maiden name on her resume just to get callbacks. "I'm not writing to ask you for a job," the letter said, clearly anticipating exactly what Emily might think. "I want to be very clear about that. I know how it would look. A Whitmore reaching out to you of all people, asking for help. I would rather starve than have you think I'm like them. I'm writing because I wanted you to know that not all of us were like Uncle Daniel and Grandmother Victoria. Some of us watched what they did to you and were ashamed. Some of us grew up wanting to be like you instead. And I wanted to say thank you, 3 years too late, for being the one person at that table who ever treated a scared kid like she mattered. That's all. I just wanted to say thank you." Emily read the letter twice, and then a third time. And she found, to her own surprise, that her eyes had filled with tears. Not the tears of old grief, something warmer than that, the recognition that even in the middle of all that cruelty, all those years of being looked through and dismissed, one small act of kindness in a hallway had landed somewhere, had taken root in a frightened girl, and had grown into a person worth knowing. She picked up the phone and called the number at the bottom of the letter. Claire answered on the second ring, and when Emily said her own name, there was a long, startled silence on the line. I didn't actually think you'd call," Claire said. "I almost didn't send the letter. I've rewritten it about 40 times. I'm glad you sent it," Emily said. "Claire, I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. You said you don't want a job from me, and I respect that. But I'm not asking about a job. I'm asking about coffee. Would you come and have coffee with an old woman who spent 12 years being the quiet one at the end of the table? I think we might have more to talk about than either of us realizes." They met that Friday, and what was supposed to be coffee turned into 3 hours. Emily had expected to like Claire. She had not expected to see so much of herself in her. The girl had the same watchfulness Emily had carried her whole life, the same habit of noticing everything and saying little, the same quiet steel underneath a gentle surface. But where Emily had spent her youth learning to hide her strength, Claire had grown up in the rubble of a family that had destroyed itself through pride and greed, and she had drawn exactly the right lesson from it. She wanted nothing to do with luxury for its own sake. She talked about finance not as a way to get rich, but as a tool, a lever, the same word Emily's father had used, a way to build something that helped people rather than just enriching the people at the top. "I watched a whole empire fall apart because everyone at the top only cared about themselves," Claire said, at one point, turning her coffee cup slowly in her hands. "And I watched you, who they threw away, spend all your energy saving the people at the bottom. The seamstresses, the warehouse staff. I read about it, everything the foundation did, and I thought, that's it. That's what money is actually for, not for jets and necklaces, for catching people when they fall." She looked up, almost embarrassed by her own intensity. "I want to do that. I don't know how yet, but that's what I want my life to be about." Emily looked at this young woman across the table, this girl who carried a cursed name and a generous heart, and she made a decision that surprised even herself. "Claire," she said, "I'm going to tell you something I've never told anyone, and I want you to understand why I'm telling you. For 12 years, I ran the Carter Foundation quietly, in the background, the same way I did everything else. And for the last 3 years, I've run it out in the open, and it's become the most meaningful work of my life. It's bigger now than I can manage alone. I've been looking for a while for someone to help me build the next part of it. Someone young, someone smart, someone who understands, in their bones, the difference between what money can buy and what money is actually for." She paused. "I've interviewed a dozen people. None of them were right. They all understood the finance. None of them understood the point." Claire had gone very still. "I'm not offering you a job because you're a Whitmore," Emily said gently. "I want to be as clear about that as you were in your letter. I'm offering it to you in spite of the name and because of the person. Because you're the first person I've talked to in 3 years who understands that the whole point of having power is to give it away to the people who don't have any. That's not something you can teach. You either have it in you or you don't, and you have it." She smiled. "So, not coffee, a job. Come and help me build something. Come and learn the work, and someday when I'm old and tired, come and carry it forward. What do you say?" Claire couldn't speak for a moment. When she finally did, her voice was thick. "People will say terrible things. They'll say a Whitmore wormed her way into the Carter Foundation. They'll say I manipulated you. They'll drag up everything Uncle Daniel did and pin it on me." "Let them," Emily said, and there was iron in it, gentle iron. "I learned a long time ago that the people who decide who you are without asking are only ever telling you about themselves. You told me that once, actually, when you were 14. I just gave you the words. You lived them." She reached across the table and took the young woman's hand, the same way she'd once sat with a crying girl in a hallway. "Let them talk, Claire. We'll be too busy doing good to hear them." Claire Whitmore came to work at the Carter Foundation the following month, and she turned out to be everything Emily had seen in her and more. She had a gift for the work, a genuine talent for finding the people who needed help and building the systems to reach them. She was tireless and humble and fierce in exactly the right ways. Under Emily's mentorship, she grew from a nervous graduate into a formidable young leader, and the whispers about her name faded over time, drowned out by the simple, undeniable evidence of the good she did. People stopped seeing a Whitmore. They started seeing Claire. And something else happened, something Emily hadn't anticipated when she made her offer over coffee. In mentoring Claire, in pouring her hard-won wisdom into someone young enough to use it for decades to come, Emily found a kind of healing she hadn't known she still needed. The 12 years she'd spent in the background hadn't been wasted after all. Every contract she'd quietly read, every mistake she'd silently caught, every hard lesson she'd learned about power and pride and human nature, all of it had value now, because she had someone to give it to. Her father's letter had said that the empire was never the point, that Emily herself was always the point. And now Emily understood the next part of that truth, the part her father had lived but never quite put into words. The point wasn't just to be strong. The point was to pass the strength on. Daniel heard about it eventually. Emily didn't tell him. She had no contact with him anymore and wanted none. But word travels, and one day, about a year after Claire joined the foundation, a short letter arrived at Emily's office, in Daniel's handwriting this time. "Emily," it read, "I heard that you took Claire under your wing. I heard what she's become working alongside you. I wanted you to know that of everything that happened, of everything I lost and everything I threw away, the thing that shames me most and moves me most is this. You had every right to hate my entire family. You had every reason to want the Whitmore name erased from the earth, and instead you found the one good person in it, and you lifted her up, and you gave her a future none of us could have given her. My niece is going to spend her life helping people, and it's because of you. You saved her the way you tried to save all of us, except she was the only one wise enough to let you. I don't ask for your forgiveness. I gave up that right a long time ago. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand what my mother never could, and what I couldn't until it was far too late. You were the best of us. You were always the best of us. And we were too blind and too proud to see it. Thank you for saving the one who could see, Daniel." Emily read the letter, and she sat with it for a long while. And then she did something she wouldn't have been able to do 3 years earlier. She forgave him. Not out loud, not in a letter back, not in any way he would ever know about. She forgave him quietly, in her own heart, the way you set down a stone you've carried so long you've stopped noticing its weight. She forgave him because holding on to the anger cost her something and cost him nothing, and because her father had taught her that the truest strength is the ability to be kind when you have every reason to be cruel. She had proven that strength once in a boardroom when she chose justice over revenge. Now she proved it again, in the privacy of her own heart, when she chose peace over resentment. She didn't reply to the letter, but she didn't throw it away either. She put it in the box with her father's papers, alongside the letter Richard Carter had written her years before, the 2 letters resting side by side, one from the father who'd known exactly who she was, and one from the husband who'd learned it far too late. Together they told the whole story of her life, the man who saw her and the man who didn't, until seeing her cost him everything. Years passed, the way years do, gently and then all at once. Emily grew older. She never remarried, and she never regretted it. She had learned, through everything, that a person doesn't need someone else to complete them, that the wholeness she'd spent so long searching for in other people had been inside her the entire time. She had good friends, chief among them old Arthur, until he passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 83, and Emily grieved him as she would have grieved a second father. She had the bank, which thrived. She had the foundation, which grew into one of the most respected charitable institutions in the country, catching tens of thousands of working people over the years. And she had Claire, who became, in every way that mattered, the daughter Emily never had. On the day Emily formally named Claire as her successor at the foundation, there was a small ceremony, nothing grand, just the staff and a few friends. Emily stood before them, older now, her hair silver, but her eyes as clear and steady as they had ever been, and she said a few words that Claire would carry for the rest of her own life. "When I was a young woman," Emily told them, "I married into a family that decided in about 10 seconds that I was worth nothing. And for 12 years, I let them believe it, because I wanted to know something. I wanted to know if a person could be loved for who they are and not for what they have. It turned out those particular people couldn't love that way. But I learned something far more important along the road. I learned that being underestimated is not an insult, it's a gift. Because while they were busy looking right through me, I was busy seeing everything. And when the time came, I knew exactly what to do." She looked at Claire. "I spent the first half of my life being told I was nothing. I've spent the second half proving that the quiet ones, the overlooked ones, the ones nobody bothers to really see, are very often the strongest people in the room. And now I'm handing that truth to someone young enough to spend her whole life living it. Claire, take good care of these people nobody else notices. They were always the ones who mattered most. Claire, weeping openly now, embraced the woman who had saved her, and the two of them stood together, the discarded wife and the cursed niece. Two people the world had once decided were worthless, now standing at the head of an institution that had lifted up more lives than either of them could count. And Emily Carter, in that moment, felt something she had chased her entire life and finally, fully possessed. Not wealth, which she'd always had. Not power, which she'd learned to wield. Something quieter and infinitely more valuable. She felt at peace, complete, home, in herself, at last. The woman they thought was worthless had become the woman who taught the next generation what worth actually meant. The wife they threw out into the rain had built something that would shelter thousands from storms of their own. And the quiet person at the end of the table, the one nobody ever bothered to really see, had turned out to be the one whose kindness echoed longest, outliving every empire, every mansion, every cruel word ever spoken against her. She had been enough all along, and in the end, she had spent her life making sure that everyone the world tried to throw away would know, deep in their bones, that they were enough too. That was Emily Carter's true fortune, not the bank, not the empire, the countless lives she'd caught on their way down, and the one young woman she'd raised up to keep catching them, long after Emily herself was gone. Some people build empires that crumble into dust. Emily Carter built something that would never fall,